Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's 9:59 here. We're going to give it till 10 a.m. sharp, just to allow a few folks to get into the room here, so to speak, and then we'll get started. So just a few more minutes. So 10 o'clock here. In the interest of everyone's time and to be respectful of everyone's schedule, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Dan Hayden. I'm going to be your host this morning for today's webinar. Seltzer Group, our insurance agency, and our partners are pleased to present to you the new normal, what business leaders and their employees need to know before resuming operations in the midst of COVID-19. So first and foremost, we hope on behalf of the Seltzer Group and our partners, we hope that you and your families are safe and healthy, and that you're doing well. I know that these are difficult times, and nothing further illustrates that than where I'm coming to you today from live, my kitchen, my home. So certainly unprecedented situations. Just know that we're here for you. And today we really have some good material to present, very interesting topics. Have some great panelists here for you as well that are going to be able to offer some tremendous amount of technical knowledge. So we're really looking forward to this. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. Any information provided today by the Seltzer Group or any of our partners are done so without any warranties, whether expressed or implied. Ultimately, it's your responsibility to evaluate the accuracy and completeness and usefulness of any opinions or material provided today. And in no way should anything today be construed as legal advice. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded, so don't feel like you need to furiously write down notes and things like that. So we can certainly have that disseminated out to you following today's presentation, and you can review that at your leisure. All participants today are going to be on mute just for the sake of efficiency. If you do have a question, we're going to ask you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen here. I will manage the questions, and at the end, we're going to devote some time to answering them. So before we get started, just a quick couple of introductions. Joining me today, we have Lyle D'Amico from Acuity Insurance. D'Amico. Lyle D'Amico is a certified safety professional. He works closely with our agency and a lot of our Acuity partners, so he's been a great resource for us. So we're definitely happy to have Lyle here with us today. Also joining us, we have Dylan Rule. He's a senior safety consultant with East Coast Risk Management. East Coast Risk Management is a partner of our agency, so we're honored to have Dylan here as well. And finally, we have Randy Grabiak. Randy Grabiak is an account executive, although he refers to himself as a producer here with the Seltzer Group. And Randy really is our commercial insurance subject matter expert. So we're really pleased and honored to have Randy here this morning as well. And finally, as I mentioned, my name is Dan Hayden. I serve as the Director of Risk Services at the Seltzer Group. So today we're really going to talk about four things, and then I'll turn it over to the professionals. First, we're going to give you a general overview of the current landscape here in Pennsylvania. So what businesses are currently facing. We're going to talk about what businesses must do with what they're required. And we're also going to give you some best practices surrounding those guidelines. Next, we're going to talk about employee and subcontractor requirements. And then finally, we're going to end with some insurance perspective, where we're going to discuss the overall implications of COVID-19 in a little bit more brevity than probably what you've been seeing out there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lyle. And Lyle, why don't you start with just giving us a background here of where are we at today in terms of what businesses are required to do in Pennsylvania?
Well, I'll start with this. I'm broadcasting here from my hometown. I'm not going to tell you what town, but it has a gigantic university right in the middle of it, okay? I'll let you guess at that. But we're supposed to be happy here, and lately we haven't been too happy. Things have been shut down, and there's not much of a university anymore. So what I want to get to here initially is where we are right now as a state, and then what's happening this past week and in the coming week. So last Friday, where things stand with the governor is last Friday they did open up construction, as you might have heard. Construction is open statewide with some caveats, those being some specific guidelines. Basically, the most primary guideline with the construction is the 4-person rule. That's saying that for commercial construction, which is any construction other than residential construction, that 4-person rule is 4 persons per 2,000 square foot of floor area for an interior operation. Outside, you don't need that, but you do need to maintain social distancing and other controls that are specified in the state's policy for construction. Now, for residential construction, it's a little different. Still a 4-person rule, but the rule is 4 persons per job site. Now, job sites being the whole house, or residential is still considered, it's still residential if you're doing a townhome, a smaller residential structure with multiple units, up to 4 units. So those are still residential, and the whole project is considered on that for residential, and you can't have more than 4 persons, those being your employees and the subcontractors, on an individual residential job. For the townhomes, as I said, that's still residential, and you treat it as 4 persons per job until a point where you have each individual unit enclosed such that with firewalls, then you can treat each of those units as its own job site and run up to 4 people in each one of them. So now today, May 8th, they are, you've probably heard that there are a number of counties in the state going to yellow. There are 24 counties that are transitioning to yellow phase, which loosens up some of the restrictions that have been applied by the governor. And however, those 24 states are primarily in the lesser populated areas of the state. In fact, it equates to about 10% of the population. So most of us are still in the red and waiting for things to calm down with the COVID. So what's open now? If you're going to yellow, some additional things that are going to be opening are primarily retail businesses, and most regular mercantile businesses, your mom and pops, are allowed to open to the public with some restrictions, and we'll talk about those. So child care is opening up in those yellow counties with restrictions again. Golf courses, of course, and liquor stores, of course, are open in those counties. So, but for the rest of us, it's still in the red phase, and that means life-sustaining operations or operations that are exempted under the governor's list, and that list is online. And the full list is online on the governor's website. For those that are open, the rule is customers and employees will wear masks while inside. And customers should not be coming into your establishment unless they are wearing the mask. One of the rules as far as the occupancy and how many people you're allowed into your establishment, the rule is 50% of your original occupancy permit as far as numbers of people allowed into your building. It is now cut in half under the red and yellow phase here for businesses that are allowed to be open. So now what? If you haven't done this so far, folks, I'd say develop yourself a plan. It doesn't have to be a giant book of a plan. It needs to be just a simple written document that spells out 2 things: the precautionary measures that you're going to take, and the response measures you're going to take in the event somebody gets sick. So those are the only two things, but we will elaborate on some of that here soon. Prevention is basically the sanitation part of it, cleaning, and also the prevention of transmission, which is your PPE and distancing procedures and similar. So the response part of it is what you do when someone gets sick. One thing that the state is asking that we do, each establishment is being asked to assign a responsible person in charge of your COVID planning and implementation and enforcement. So they're calling that person the pandemic safety officer, and somebody from the company or your place of business should be identified as that person, the go-to person for developing and implementing and monitoring the plan. Sources of information. There's a lot out there. You can go out and find an example plan anywhere on the internet right now. But I advise you to stick to three major sources of information. The most or the master source of information is going to be the CDC, federal CDC. So that is the agency where everybody else is pretty much taking their cues from, okay? The next might be OSHA. OSHA has a guideline on their website, and I will emphasize it is a guideline. There are no OSHA standards specific for COVID-19. What OSHA will do is they could cite under their general duty clause if they find that there is an egregious violation of the recognized protocols issued by the state and some of these sanitation procedures that are being required. I don't anticipate that would be a common occurrence with OSHA. They're only if they get some significant complaint would I see them coming out to investigate such things. So, but that leaves us with the primary source of the information in Pennsylvania, which is going to be Pennsylvania Department of Health and the governor's website. Those are the agencies in Pennsylvania that basically have the force of law and can tell you what you should be doing here. So visit those websites and gather your information and use that as your source. The governor, as I said, they have the enforcement powers. But in addition to that, those primary sources, I would also highly recommend, given your industry, you know what the folks in your industry, your competitors, and your associations specific to what you folks do. Those are going to be great sources of information, particularly associations. They're really, for various industries, are going to be able to tell you what's going on with your industry and what you need to be aware of. And then just, seeing what other people are doing in your industry.
Great. Thanks, Lyle. We really appreciate that. And as you can see here, there's a ton of requirements and a ton of things that businesses must do. I'd invite all of you, if you do have questions, I know that's a lot of material there. Feel free to use the Q&A feature here at the bottom of the toolbar. So Dylan, in light of what Lyle is talking about, if I'm a business owner in Pennsylvania, what are some best practices that I should be implementing in my organization or in my business?
Well, really it comes down to, number one, educating yourself properly. Some of the things that Lyle talked about are just, so important. And it's important, especially for you to make sure that you're getting quality information. There is so much junk out there. I remember in the early stages of this virus, you'd go on Facebook and it would suggest that if you get into a sauna, the heat of the sauna is going to kill the virus in your mouth and your respiratory system. Yeah, that was going around. And obviously, I have a wife that serves on the infection control board at her hospital that she works at. And, we were laughing about it. But the problem there isn't that, you know, it's out there. The problem is that that information is out there. It is completely untrue. It is not founded in any kind of science. And there's a lot of things out there that, you know, if you want to find something that, you know, you agree with, you're going to be able to find it on the internet. So, you know, just really be careful about where you're getting your information from. The CDC is going to be your primary source of information, or should be your primary source of information. The PA Department of Health has done a good job of putting out some guidance documents, which, you know, I'm not going to say that we copy and pasted from for the outline of, you know, presentation, but it was a big basis of what we're discussing here. So, you know, a lot of what we're talking about today came from those Department of Health documents, the CDC documents, and, you know, just quite frankly, a lot of this comes down to common sense. You know, your basic occupancy limits. You know, what should you be doing as an employer? Well, you should take a look at, you know, what your building is rated for, and then you should establish, you know, occupancy limits that fit with the requirements and recommendations of the state. And just remember, you know, these face masks, they're not optional. There are some instances where if an individual has a health issue, also children under the age of 2 are not required to wear a mask. But, you know, you need to be wearing a mask if you go into a facility, okay? Period. There's no, you know, gray area. There's no iffy part to that unless you have a legitimate medical, you know, condition that prevents you from wearing that. Companies that are not in compliance with that can be shut down by the state. I was just in, you know, a convenience store earlier this morning, getting some gas and picking up some things for the house, and there were 2 people in there that did not have a mask on. And, you know, it made me very uncomfortable to be around individuals that weren't taking this seriously. And if you as a company are not enforcing those rules that are put out by the state, I'll tell you, it doesn't look very good for you, okay? There's a veterinarian locally that my in-laws took their dog to. And the veterinarian is just a kind of a mom and pop setup. It's the guy and his assistant, and neither of them were wearing a mask. And when they asked about it, the guy just said, "Oh, it's just the 2 of us. We're fine. We don't have anything to worry about." I will tell you, he has lost the business of not only my family, but my in-laws and many of the other people that we told about this, because he's not taking this seriously. So this is, you know, very much a PR thing. You have to be very careful with how your business looks to the outside world. Getting into some of the other things, hours of operation. The PA Department of Health recommends that you have some type of time for high-risk patients or high-risk individuals to shop and or use your business. A lot of the grocery stores, for instance, are opening an hour early to allow time for elderly people, for pregnant people, for at-risk individuals to come in and shop and hopefully be in a scenario and be in an environment where, you know, there's less people and there's less of a threat of infection. So that's important, just making sure that, you know, your occupancy, your hours of operation are, you know, fluid and following what needs to be followed. Monitored 1 in and 1 out entry, okay? If you are getting close to your occupancy limits, you need to get somebody out to the entry door and you need to get somebody out to the exit door to make sure that people are keeping with that occupancy and that you've got a proper area for people to line up at. There was a good picture, I should say a bad picture going around of the Walmart in St. Clair, which is close to some of the Seltzer offices. And there was an area for people to queue up and wait, but they were on top of each other. You know, nobody was monitoring that 6-foot distance. Nobody was telling individuals, you know, you need to, you know, stay apart from each other. Again, that doesn't look so good for your business when you've got these kind of pictures going around on social media. Assigning an employee to wipe down carts or any other shared things. Understand that some of this stuff is more geared, towards retail. And it's important that, you know, we think about retail because in many ways these are high risk areas. But I will get into some of the other recommendations for shops and construction and things like that later on. And then again, just general distancing. You know, you just want to make sure that people are following those 6-foot rules. Dan, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Dylan. We appreciate that. And I know that there's a lot of information out there. And that's the troubling part, is that there are so many resources out there. And I feel often that there's this race to be the first person to have the most content or the most clicks,
Yeah.
or being viewed the most times. And I can't stress it, the importance enough to consider your sources in these situations. So your point about that is well taken. So no, we talked a lot about here about what we have to do in advance of things. Is there anything else you wanted to add there, Dylan, before we talk about moving forward?
Well, I mean, obviously employees and subcontractors are a huge part of this. And, you know, when you bring people into your facility, when you allow visitors to come in, when you allow employees to return to your facilities, things are going to need to change. You know, it's not going to be like it once was, not for, you know, quite some time. You're going to need to screen and monitor individuals before they come into your facility. I've developed a really good questionnaire that I've distributed out to my clients. It just includes a couple simple questions. You know, are you symptomatic? Do you have any of the following symptoms? Coughing, shortness of breath, fever, muscle pain, headache. You know, you've heard all of these symptoms before. I don't need to repeat them. Everybody knows what they need to look for, but you really should be questioning your employees when they come in. A lot of documents are recommending a temperature check. And I want to be careful with how I recommend that, how I tell my clients to implement this, because if done incorrectly, if done unsafely, this can be even more dangerous than simply just having employees self-certify. So the questionnaire says, do you have a fever? Okay. It's up to the employee to check themselves before they go to work to see if they have a fever, obviously. If you're in a situation, you know, like food packing, things like that, where employees have to be closer together, a temperature check is a good idea, but you have to be so careful with how you implement it, right? I wouldn't recommend a temperature check for an office situation. You know, for an insurance company, a temperature check, in my opinion, doesn't make a lot of sense. But for construction companies, for manufacturing, for food manufacturing, I think the temperature check makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't you agree, Lyle?
Sure. There's no reason not to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
and it is, you know, the primary means of identifying whether there might be an issue.
Sure, absolutely. But you have to make sure that you do it correctly, okay? We kind of joked about this before. You know, you've got the old style temperature thermometer that you put under your tongue for 30 seconds, and then, you know, it gives you a reading. That's obviously not what you want to be doing as an employer. That's very unsafe, even if you're wiping it off between uses. The idea that somebody would think to do that is absolutely terrifying, and it, you know, needs to be said that that is not the proper way to do a temperature check. Okay, I should have brought it up with me. I have one downstairs. I should have had it here with me for this presentation. I apologize that I don't, but they have these gun style temperature checks. You know, it uses a laser.
Yeah, I've seen them, right.
Exactly. It's a non-contact, you know, you use it to check the surface of a grill, you know, cooking, things of that nature. That's what I use it for.
Right.
That is a great way to check the temperature of an individual.
Okay.
But it's very important that you buy the proper one. The one that I have at home specifically says it is not designed and it is not accurate enough to give a human's temperature. Okay. So that's a good way to do it. An individual can be, you know, a foot or two away from the individual when they take that test, but you need to protect the person that is actually taking that test. They need to have the proper personal protective equipment. They need to have some kind of barrier between themselves and the employee. I will tell you, one of my former clients, they're in the food manufacturing industry, and they are local to Schuylkill County. They're doing a phenomenal job of this. I wish that I could have shared a picture, but I didn't get a chance to get consent from them for today. But they have a big plastic, you know, plexiglass barrier between the temperature taker and the employee. And there's just a small hole in that wall for the taker to put the gun through. Now, sorry, you know, the gun thing, let's not get into a workplace violence thing. We're talking about a temperature gun here, okay? They put the temperature gun through the hole, and then they click it at the individual, and it gives them a reading, right? That's a safe way of doing it. Now, some of the other literature that we're talking about uses a pulse oximeter. Now, that is a device that basically clamps onto your finger. and measures the O2 in your bloodstream. It's very, very important that, in my opinion, you not use this device. I've seen it at a couple places. I consider it to be unofficial advice at this time, and there really isn't a good way of checking and sanitizing that device in between uses. So due to that proximity, please make sure that you're not using one of these pulse oximeters as well.
Great point. No, that's very interesting. And again, that just gets back to, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So I'm glad that you gentlemen are here today to help us out with that. So Dylan, you're talking a lot about a lot of procedural things that we have to do. What about from like an administrative perspective? Or, I see a lot of clients are asking about alternative work environments, whether we're seeing the benefit of being able to work remotely from home. Do you see that continuing, or are there any other things that employers can do to maybe mitigate their exposure?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, number one is distancing, and work from home comes into that. If you have employees that don't need to be there, don't have them there, okay? If they can do their job effectively from home, if they can come in and get their computer and take it home with them, if they have just any kind of scenario, a kitchen table, a dining room table that they can sit at and do some work from home, they're going to be safer if they can do that.
Sure.
If you have to have the individuals come into work, you need to make sure that you're properly distancing. One of the things that I really liked in the Department of Health, and we can kind of apply this to offices, is the Department of Health specifically listed grocery stores like registers. So using every other register instead of every register, and then staggering the use of the register throughout the day so that you can properly and thoroughly clean down the ones that aren't in use. So you'd have registers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, you'd use 1 and 3 from the hours of 8 to 10 a.m. and then you'd switch to the opposite, and then allow time to properly disinfect and clean the ones that weren't in use for that previous time. The same can be done with cubicles and office spaces. I have one friend that works for a customer service company, and what they've been doing is every other week they have a different team in their facility. And it means that for the week that they're down 50% of their people, they're very busy, but they're still much safer because they're able to spread out throughout the office and they don't have all these people jammed into a single area. So you need to be creative, and we could talk till we're blue in the face about all these different scenarios and environments that you may have, and we're not going to capture the environments that everybody here on the call is exposed to or is working in. So the best advice I can give you is just ask. You have these resources from Seltzer, from East Coast Risk Management. Please reach out to us and ask these questions, because we're talking in very broad terms here.
Sure.
But we're not going to be able to fix everything today.
You're absolutely right, Dylan. And, that's a great point, because this is a lot of information. And I can tell you that I get a lot of requests from clients, both internal and external. And they say, Dan, where can I go to get this information? Who can help me with this? So is East Coast, are you guys able to help out with creating COVID-19 safety plans? Or let's say I'm a business leader and I have an HR question about, how do I formalize this program? Or do I need to put this in the right written format? Is that something that you could help our clients with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to give everybody a background on East Coast Risk Management and what we do, we have 3 tenants. We have 3 main departments that we service our clients with. The first being claims management. So if you have a scenario in which your employees are exposed at work, okay, they will file workers' comp. That's what we're recommending to our clients that they do. We've seen this happen with a couple of our clients. I can't give any specifics on industry or anything for privacy purposes, but we have had a couple COVID claims come through to us that have then been passed on to the carrier. So we would then help manage that claim, help do some investigation, just help with that process to make sure that it's handled correctly, both from the employer side and the carrier side. Next, we have our human resources consulting division, which is really going to be very helpful as you unfortunately may have to lay off employees and then bring them back, furlough, whatever you want to call it. We can be very helpful in that process as well. We can also be very helpful in making sure that your policies and procedures fit with the state mandates and fit with the variety of state laws. The expanded FMLA being a prime example. It used to be that you had to have 50 employees or more in order for FMLA to come into effect. Well, as you all know, that changed drastically. You know, we've got clients that are using us for what we're referring to as EFMLA, expanded emergency, whichever you want to think of it as. But this expanded FMLA is causing a lot of clients a lot of grief and a lot of heartache. And we're there to help. You know, we've got a really good division that handles that. I work also on the IT side, so I've helped them with a lot of the IT development of those things. But, you know, we've got that HR side, we've got that claim side. And then lastly, we've got the safety side, of which I'm one of the senior safety consultants. And I have, you know, COVID safety plans filling up my hard drive right now. I'm sending them out to my current clients. I'm sending them out to clients that need it. And that is something that we can develop for you if it's something that you need. Lyle is correct. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say you can't Google it. Absolutely, you can Google and find those plans. But again, you want to caution yourself. You want to just remember, what is the source? And can you really trust the information that is included within that example plan? Did that
absolutely? Thank you, Dylan. That's great, and that's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Is because there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and I know if I was a business owner in Pennsylvania, I would be looking for resources like East Coast Risk Management to help guide me through this uncertain time. But Lyle, let me throw it over to you for a second. So we talked a lot about what businesses have to do from a preventative standpoint. What happens if I have a positive test, or if I have a suspicion, or if there is an event that occurs at my business? What type of response are you required to have?
Well, let's take the scenario. The employee, say the employee reports ill while on the job, or they call you at night and say, "Hey, I'm really sick with this, and here's my symptoms." And you measure those symptoms as to what the common symptoms for COVID are, and you determine, hey, I think this might be an issue here, a COVID issue. Basically, you advise the employee to, if they're still there, they must seek treatment. They must vacate the premises and go get treatment, and preferably get tested for it. So that's the first thing. Second is you certainly want to secure the area, identify where that employee's been in your facility, and secure that area from entry by everybody else. So once it's secured, the state and the Department of Health is recommending, and CDC recommends, that you let that area sit idle and allow it to decontaminate itself for 24 hours prior to sending someone in. Let it sit, unoccupied or away from everyone else and secured for 24 hours to give the potential the virus its lifespan. For the most part, a good part of it may be extinguished over that time period. And that's why they do say 24 hours, wait that 24 hours. So after that, we would go in and do some decontamination, sanitizing of that area, all the areas where that employee was, the workstation, any common areas where the employee was, restrooms, lunchroom, entryways, anything where that employee has passed through should be sanitized. As well, you certainly want to be advising folks that have been in contact with that employee over the past 48 hours, and advising them that there's been an exposure or potential exposure within the facility. By law and HIPAA regulations, you technically can't say that person's name who may be infected, but potentially exposed employees need to be advised. There has been an issue. So cleaning and disinfecting. Back to the employees that may have been exposed to that to the infected employee. They're considered potentially exposed at risk if they've been within 6 feet of that employee for a period of 10 minutes or longer. That puts them in a category where they are considered an exposed employee, and they are actually need to be asked to leave the facility for a time period and go get checked for whether they actually have to be tested. So in cases where the employee goes is sick or exposed, in both cases, the general rule is they're out of work for 14 days. And that's based on whether or not they get tested or not.
Okay.
If they don't get tested, it's automatically 14 days. If you get tested and you come out negative, then you can return to work after 3 days.
Interesting.
That's
So
the
that
rule.
wasn't always the case, though, right, Lyle? Is that a revision to the original order? Because I know there was some misconception.
Well, let me back up and say that if the infected employee, if it's a suspected infected employee and they go and they get checked, and there never was an actual infected in person in the facility, if they had symptoms and they got tested and it's negative, then they can come back to work. If you're an exposed employee and it's determined that there was an infection in the facility and you were an exposed employee, but you show no signs, you still are required to go and get tested. If you get tested and come up negative, you still are required to wait 72 hours to return to work, provided you're in good health. You may return, but they want that 72 hours to verify that nothing has transmitted to the exposed employee. When I say exposed, not the one that's infected.
Right.
You can understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lyle. So, as an employer, what's my responsibility to notify others? Like, what's the frequency of that, or how do I have to notify? Is there any guidelines around that?
Well, yes, you everybody in the workplace that is in the area or has any use of the area where that potentially infected person had been needs to be notified.
Okay. Now, if let's say I'm a supervisor and one of my employees says, Dan, I think I might have symptoms. What's the recommendation from that perspective in that scenario?
Well, they would need to vacate and go seek treatment and testing.
Okay.
Again, and then you would proceed with notification and the process of isolating that area and decontamination.
Now, the purpose of today, it really isn't to get into a lot of HR regulations. So I'd encourage that if you are a business owner or a business leader and you're unsure about what you're required or obligated to do, and you're nervous, by all means, because of your relationship with the Seltzer Group, if you're a client of ours, even if you're not, you can contact East Coast Risk Management's HR consulting department. They staff 2 licensed attorneys to help out with these issues. So I know there's a myriad of complex HR, untested, really unproven, unchallenged in court scenarios. So in order to help you get through this, we're going to recommend that you contact the professionals, and that's going to be at East Coast Risk Management. So moving on here, Dylan, any other considerations that you see from your perspective as an employer?
Well, I just want to touch briefly on what you said with the HR, and that is just a lot of the government regulations that have come out on paid sick time and paid sick leave for employees are meant to encourage employees to not go into work when they're sick. That's the biggest thing that we can all do, is follow the government recommendations, follow the new regulations that are out as it relates to paid sick time. And I'm far from an HR expert. That's not my wheelhouse. So again, I'll echo what Dan said, call my colleagues over at the HR helpline for these questions. But they aren't just saying, as I understand it, you have to provide this paid sick time. There is some relief for businesses in the form of credits towards the taxes that you owe to the federal government when you do provide these paid sick times. So that's an important thing to remember, that it's not just this overwhelming burden that is being put on employers. There's some help for you in that you can get a credit on the taxes owed. So other than those HR issues, obviously masks. Where are you getting masks? Where are you getting this personal protective equipment? Where are you getting respirators if you need it and you're in the construction industry? That's a easier said than done, thing right now. It's very difficult for companies to get the proper personal protective equipment. And I will say that to the degree that they can, OSHA is going to be a little bit more lenient if you can't get the personal protective equipment. Now, that being said, if you can't get it, you need to be able to document that. You need to be able to have some kind of paper trail of, emails to Granger, emails to your local hardware store, whatever. You're going to need to have some kind of proof that you really did try and get this equipment for your employees. And then lastly, just with the masks, the homemade CDC style guideline following masks are acceptable to be worn in the workplace. You can take, something as simple as an old t-shirt, cut it up with a pair of scissors, and there you go, you've got a mask. A bandana, a sewing machine. These are some of the things that you may need, but they're not exactly required. You don't have to have a sewing machine in order to provide a decent mask to your employees.
Right.
Next is the disinfectants. I will tell you, I was just in Costco 2 weeks ago, and there were big shelves full of disinfectants, okay? Now, let me preface that by saying these were disinfectants that are completely useless against COVID. There weren't any bleach or alcohol-containing sanitizers at the Costco that I was at 2 weeks ago. These are the types of things that you need to be using to disinfect your workplace. So be very, very careful to just use, some of these disinfectants that are out on the market. I was cleaning out my desk. The Seltzer office is moving and my cubicle has to be moved along with it. And I found this promotional hand sanitizer that one of my clients had given me. And I looked at the back of it because I was like, oh, hand sanitizer, that's liquid gold.
Right.
I can sell this on eBay for 20 bucks. Well, turned around, looked at the back of it. It was alcohol-free hand sanitizer. Okay. So just be really, really careful with the types of materials that you're using, both for surfaces and for your employees. And understand that, some of it may do absolutely nothing against COVID. Next is just in general paper products. I haven't seen a huge drop in the availability of like paper towels and things like that, but it may be a good idea to maybe transition to some reusable like shop towels, things like that, as much as you can. Just with the caveat that if you're using a Lysol spray on a reusable towel, you really shouldn't be wiping down more than, say, 3 surfaces. That's the guidance that I've read. Basically, if you wipe down the example that was said to me by my wife was that if you take this paper towel or you take this, shop towel, spray Lysol on it, and wipe down every single door handle in your house, and you have more than 3 door handles, you're actually doing more harm than you are good. So just be very careful with that. It is very much a balance as it relates to paper products, disinfectants, masks, and personal protective equipment with, giving the employees enough to use and making sure that you have enough on hand to last us through this crisis. Because like it or not, this is not ending anytime soon. So you need to be very careful with the use of these things and understand that in some circumstances you may need to wash and reuse some of these materials. Does that make sense, Dan?
Absolutely. No, that to me that's wise advice. That's certainly what I'm seeing out there, and our organization's going through the same procurement, issues and having difficulty, purchasing things and having them stocked up. Your point about masks is well taken, and I have recently been getting questions about, is it required to have an N95 respirator in all industries, or is there any kind of relief? Is my homemade mask acceptable in, like, say, an office environment?
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, Dan, with the N95s for sure. The guidance, everything we're seeing on the news from the CDC is really quite clear. N95 masks are meant for the people that truly need them. And right now, that's our construction companies that are dealing with silica-related materials and chemicals that need that for filtering. And then most of all, it's needed for our individuals, for our people in the front lines in the healthcare industry. They need to be using the N95 respirators to keep themselves safe. And, you know, this is something I get a little emotional about because my wife is
Sure.
one of those people on the front
Right.
line. She's a nurse. Her hospital, thankfully, is very well prepared, but they are having to reuse certain surgical masks and other things like that. Whereas before, it was very simple for them to just take it off, throw it in the trash, and then get a new one. And they're having to balance a lot of things. You know, they're having to balance employee safety, they're having to balance patient safety, and it's tough right now. You know, I would not want the job of infection prevention coordinator in any hospital in America right now, because it's very tough, and those people are really doing the best that they can. So when I'm out and about and I see somebody in the grocery store with an N95, I'll be honest with you, it kind of pisses me off, because that is something that should be reserved for our healthcare professionals at this time. And
That's a great point, Dylan. And, you know, I think for everyone here, you know, thank you to your wife for her service. We hope she, you know, she stays safe and healthy. Lyle, from your perspective, is there anything else that employers should need to know out there?
Yeah, I think
what else are they
one thing I
facing?
wanted to touch on was contractors
Okay.
and vehicles and equipment. Don't overlook sanitizing your vehicles and equipment. I can't think of anything that collects germs more than a steering wheel or a shift knob. So don't overlook that. All vehicles should be cleaned, and that should be a procedure of the driver should be assigned that duty to make sure the vehicle is sanitized when they're through using it or before they use it.
well, if I could add too, another really important aspect of that is it's not just vehicles. This is also forklifts and tools, anything that might be shared throughout the facility with multiple employees. What I'm advising my clients to do is to assign an individual to a forklift for the day and have that individual be the only one operating that forklift. Because if you don't, if you've got that passed around, there's a perfect example of a infectious, you know, potential right there.
Great point. Absolutely. So thank you guys for that. Now, Randy, you've been awfully quiet here, so I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a second. What are you seeing out there, Randy, from an insurance agent's perspective? What kind of questions are you fielding? What are some concerns that your clients have been expressing to you?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we have to understand that while there are a lot of concerns with keeping our employees, you know, healthy and not getting infected, we do have to understand there is an insurance aspect, like a liability from an insurance aspect as well. One thing Dylan said that I cannot stress enough right now, he said the word document at one point. He said, if you can't get these masks, you need to document that. And I'll stress that you should really be documenting everything right now. You should be documenting that, documenting your payrolls, documenting absolutely everything, because, you know, we hear this term so much now and we're probably getting sick of it, but these are unprecedented times, right? We don't know what's going to happen down the road. We don't know what rulings are going to happen. So you need to make sure you're keeping track of everything you're doing. Document, you know, literally everything. That way you have it.
Sure.
And that way, if you are put on the spot after a ruling, you have proof of it.
So, Randy, why is documenting payroll important? How does that affect you?
Great question, Dan. And that is because, again, you know, from a workers' comp standpoint, you know, many of you know workers' comp, there's a rate that's given to your industry and to an employee type. So as people are being laid off, as people are working at home, you know, maybe their exposure is a lot less than it would be if they're a construction worker. If someone's at home getting paid versus, you know, on top of a roof, they're not quite, you know, the exposure isn't nearly the same. So,
Sure.
you know, coming down the line here, there could be a change to the rate that your employees are given. And if you document everything, you know, you're in a good spot that if there is a change in that rate, maybe you could get, you know, some money back or something like that from the Workers' Comp Bureau. So
Very
that's one thing
interesting.
to
You're
keep in mind.
absolutely correct. So, Randy, let me ask you, if I'm a client of yours and I have a suspected or an alleged or actually a real employee that's contaminated or infected with COVID-19, should I be reporting a workers' comp claim?
Yeah, you
Okay.
should. Report
And
a
why is
workers'
that?
comp. Well,
Is that going
because
to be covered by workers' comp?
uh, so again, we're unprecedented right now. Each carrier has their own thought on everything. We're finding that, you know, some carriers are telling us if we can prove that the employee did become infected while at work, then yes, there's a good chance
Interesting.
that'll be covered. But again, you have to prove they were infected at work. How are you going to be able to do that? Okay, that's the question there.
Certainly, that's the challenge. You're absolutely right. And there's legislation out there. I know from other states, Washington State and Kentucky, for example, where first responders are automatically being granted workers' comp benefits if they are infected with COVID-19. They're removing that standard, that question. So that two-part test that you're alluding to, is being removed in those situations. It's possible, and like you mentioned, again, unprecedented. We don't have any blueprint here to go off of. It's certainly possible that there could be some legislative intervention, whether at a state or a federal level, that says that these claims must be paid. So continuing here, Randy, with the theme of claims, what other types of exposures do you foresee increasing because of the COVID-19 pandemic, whether on the general liability front or property or any employment practices? Are you getting questions about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have to pretty much assume that there's going to be an increase in employment practices claims. And the reason for that is, employees have been furloughed, they've been laid off. There's been mass furloughs and mass layoffs. Again, unprecedented times, right? We don't know what these employees are thinking. They're going to start coming back to work. Are they going to have their same positions? Are their hours going to be the same? This virus is affecting a lot of different things. So are they going to think, well, I don't like how my employee handled this. I was out of work for 6 weeks. Now they're asking me to come back. They could file, a suit against you saying.
So, Randy, would you say that most employers that you will come across have employment practices liability insurance, or is that sort of not really focused on? Is that prevalent?
It's becoming more popular, but still a lot of people they're not worried about it. They say, I know my employees, they're fantastic people. And, we're talking about, it could be any size company. It could be a company with 5 employees, it could be a company with 50 employees, 500 employees. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't sue me. Well,
Right.
Again, we don't know what's going to happen. So one thing you want to make sure, check your coverages, make sure you do have employment practices coverage. We would recommend reach out to your agent, reach out to us, anybody you need to. Get good information on that, because that's one area that we do anticipate claims rising. Another area that we can see some claims rising is, believe it or not, in cyber breaches and cyber claims. As companies are closed right now, they're not sure how to operate. They're trying to operate in some capacity. There's these people out there that see this as a golden opportunity to try to breach someone's system and cause some havoc in some way, shape, or form. So we have been seeing a rise in cyber claims as well. So that's another area we definitely recommend. Check your policy, reach out to your agent, make sure you have a sufficient cyber policy in place to help combat that.
Absolutely. I know we could talk about this all day long, and we could have, several other webinars devoted to these topics specifically, but just to touch upon a couple of other brief areas really quickly, and then we'll move on to the Q&A phase of the presentation. A popular question I've received is about business interruption. That's obviously on everyone's forefront of their minds, and there's been a million articles written about it. We have seen some cases come through now in the court system. There's been proposed legislation, whether in Pennsylvania or other states. Even President Trump has alluded to this several times in some of his addresses. So at this moment, again, not to get into the extreme details here, but the insurance carriers are opining that there's no coverage for business interruption related to COVID-19. Certainly that we expect that to be challenged. We don't know the outcome of that. So for that reason, we're recommending our clients, if you've sustained business interruption or loss of business income because of government shutdown or reduction in your operations, then we recommend you file a claim because we don't know what's going to happen. And we don't know what's going to happen. It's possible that, that there could be some, again, legislative intervention similar to after 9/11 when TRIA was enacted. It's possible that could occur here in this situation, but also too, some lending institutions, whether it's a grant or other type of monetary or any kind of fiduciary loan, things like that, they'll have the requirement that you've placed your insurance carrier on notice first as well. And then I can't echo this enough, but Randy, what you mentioned about documentation, from a general liability perspective, we want to make sure that we're demonstrating you're acting in good faith, you're following recommendations from the CDC, from the Department of Health, other federal regulatory bodies. You're doing everything you possibly can. You're acting in good faith to protect your employees and your customers. So in the event that something does come down the line, you have a stronger defense for that. Again, there's a lot of myriad of other potential implications here because of COVID-19. Just know that folks at the Seltzer Group, East Coast Risk Management, Acuity Insurance, our other carrier partners are here with you to help you get through this. We're a one team in this situation. We work for you, so I'm very much of that opinion that I'm a servant leader in our organization. We serve your interests. We want to make sure that your interests are fully protected and served. So we have a few minutes left here, and I do see a couple of questions coming through the pipeline here. There was a question pertaining to some guidelines for, would it be possible to have a seminar on guidelines for exempt companies who are continuing to work, so essential businesses? It looks like, so guys, Dylan and Lyle, can you differentiate here for a second? Anything you presented today, does that apply to essential businesses and non-essential, or where should we draw the line here?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything we talked
Right.
about today applies to the businesses that are currently operating.
To everybody, right?
Maybe even especially the companies that are currently operating,
Sure.
because your employees and your customers are, at a heightened risk of infection. I often think of, grocery stores. They're kind of a scary place to be right now because everyone has to go to the grocery store no matter what. So you really have to make sure that you're following these recommendations if you're open currently, and then make plans for those that are going to open.
Right. So just to be clear, everyone here, that what's being presented here today applies to everybody, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it looks
if
like
you're in the red, if you're still in the red counties, these all apply. They and in the yellow. If you're an open business right now, all these requirements and guidelines and orders are applicable, depending on your industry too. There's like I mentioned, construction's got some unique rules to it, one thing I will say though is that there may be different protocols for healthcare specific. Any industry that already has an infection control plan as a requirement of their industry, such as hospitals, nursing homes, and things like that. Those are going to take, I won't say precedent, but those are still applicable in addition to the guidelines that we have here.
Great point. Okay. And it looks like we just had one other question that Dylan had responded to offline here, related to some HR questions about requirements for employees, notifications. If an infected employee goes home but doesn't want to get tested, what rights does the employer have? And I totally agree with Dylan. These are excellent questions for our HR hotline at East Coast Risk Management. All contact information for the HR hotline, including myself and all the panelists, will be provided to you when we distribute the copy of today's presentation. So expect that here shortly following the conclusion of our presentation this morning. But yes, I think ultimately, I'm the first to say we're not HR professionals that are on this panel currently. A lot of these issues do cross over into the HR world, so we'd certainly recommend that you go to the professionals at East Coast for assistance on that end. Okay. So looks like that's the end of it looks like one more is coming through. We have a couple more minutes for this. So we have a question coming.
That one.
Oh, excuse me.
I can take that one.
Please go ahead, Dylan. Thank you.
Yeah. So Kathy asked, how would an auction company proceed? We are on site as well as in a facility. I living down in Lancaster County, like Dan does. There was recently a livestock auction that still happened. And, it was all over the papers. There were pictures of everybody standing around. And it definitely got me thinking about how that industry is going to have to adapt in order to, get through this. And at this time, I mean, the majority of auctions are all going to exceed, that 10, that group of 10 or more people. So it's very important that you start to look at and start to think about ways that auctions could be done online. At that point, that's really the best guidance that I can give for you, because I just don't see these large in-person auctions coming back within, the next couple of weeks. Kathy, does that help?
Yeah, and Kathy, that's a great question. We can certainly, if you have further questions about that, we can certainly answer these a little bit offline, since it's very specific to your organization. It's 11 o'clock now. I want to be mindful of everyone's schedules. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's a ton of material and a lot of technical knowledge that's being sent out there. So it's totally understandable if you have a lot of questions. If you're thinking about this later on and want to get in contact with us, just please reach out to us directly. And again, this webinar is going to be provided to you here shortly. Special thanks to Johnny Gray in our marketing department at the Seltzer Group. She does an excellent job of keeping us connected while we're socially distant. So we really appreciate that. And truly, I mean it, we sincerely hope that you and your families remain healthy and safe. And we look forward to seeing you soon in person. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Be well.